Hey everyone, Dan from Convos here. We're here with Shane Simonsen from Zero Input Agriculture. Shane, thank you so much for showing us around.
No worries, no worries. Welcome to my big pile of flaming weeds.
We're going to go and have a look around and see what's going on here, and yeah, really excited to check it out. So Shane, take it away.
Okay, no worries. So 5 years ago, all of this was a kikuyu cow paddock that was about yay deep when it got away.
Yeah.
And little by little, I ran a bit of bird wire around this and put my flock of geese in here. Every night, they got free range during the day, and they cleared out all of the grass, all the kikuyu, saved me from doing any weeding, concentrated nutrients from out in the paddock without me having to lift a wheelbarrow.
Thank God for geese.
And little by little, I've moved down and filled this all out. There's 6 cells effectively in the beginning.
Yeah.
I planted our amazing Mexican sunflower as a shrub. A bit of a windbreak all around.
What's going on around the edge?
Yep. So that was a really good way to kind of claim the space and protect the boundaries from kikuyu grass running in the beginning. I'm now taking that out bit by bit and letting the vetiver grass take over that role. Because the Mexican sunflower is really great as a quick screen, but it's a little bit too aggressive in the long run, whereas the vetiver puts its roots straight down and you can grow things right beside it without it, stealing all of the goodness that you put into the soil.
Great. So does it spread? Does it spread much?
No, it's a sterile hybrid, and even though it's got a really powerful root system, it goes straight down, which is almost no plants do that.
Yeah.
And it produces biomass that's a little bit more useful. If you want to do a bit of mulching with it, it's pretty much ready to go. Yeah. Whereas with the Japanese sunflowers, great for goat fodder. The plants are getting a little bit old and woody now. Yeah. You can turn it into charcoal as well, which is one of the main things I add to the soil here. Yeah. But eventually it just becomes a bit of a pain to manage as it kind of spreads around. Yeah. So yeah, it will layer a little bit, it'll self-seed a little bit. It's not too bad. And yeah, really great for producing biomass, but it needs much more intensive management. Whereas the vetiver, you can leave it go for a bit longer before it needs a touch up.
That's right, and that sort of works in with your philosophy of zero input, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything I need for this garden is right here. I've got my goats nearby. I've got the biomass for producing charcoal and a little bit of mulch. But the plants themselves that are living and growing do the bulk of the work.
Great. So you're saying charcoal a couple of times that's one of your main things you're putting into your ground.
Yes.
What sort of benefits are you getting out of the charcoal?
It's mostly a textural thing.
Okay.
It contains the ash that's in any biomass. If you burn it all the way down, it's got those minerals. Yeah. But if you stop it from burning all the way to ash and have the charcoal, it's really useful for improving the structure of our very strange, heavy clay soil.
It's going to give you a bit of aeration and whatnot.
Absolutely, yeah. It just makes it a little bit workable through a wider range of moisture levels.
Yeah.
Our native unchanged soil, you have to have it at just the right level of dampness for it to be anything for getting a shovel into. When it's dry, you just bounce off it, and when it's really wet and heavy, you can't even come in here because you don't want to compress the soil. I basically stay out.
Yeah. And
all the paths go underwater when we get big downpours. We're on the top of a hill. That's how much clay we've got here.
That's incredible. The big water holding area. All right.
So yeah, this particular cell is mostly for perennial crops. So I've got the asparagus coming back. You can probably see a few of the ferns sticking out.
Yep.
Pineapples, I'm finally getting good results out of them. And a whole range of other things just kind of tucked in and around. But yeah, I'm leaning towards the Ayurvedic herbal tradition.
Okay.
A lot of people try and struggle to grow European herbs here, and it's just so heartbreaking every time you get to 40 degrees and 100% humidity and they all just melt. Yeah. And you're like, oh, I better start again. Whereas the Ayurvedic herbs, you've got to get out the bike chain and kind of whip them to stop them taking over. And they actually work. They've got amazing properties. It just takes a little bit of research and trial and error to figure out what you can do with them.
All right, no worries. There's some for everyone to have a look at home. This is the vetiver grass?
That's the vetiver grass. It takes a few years to kind of fill out and do its job.
Yeah.
But when it does, if you plant it closely enough, it'll even stop the geese from getting through.
Fantastic.
So I'm hoping in the long run I don't have to keep putting up chicken mesh.
Well, you can see it really does get fence-like, doesn't it? No, that's fantastic.
Yeah, geese are pretty good because they really have to already know that they can find something on the other side.
Yep.
So if you can make a decent visual screen, that'll often be enough to stop them. Whole lot of trellises here covered in lima beans. Yep. I don't know if they look pretty dreadful. Because we had such a cold summer, they fruited all the way through the summer when they normally wait until the end of autumn.
Yeah, right.
And we've got a particular nasty pest that gets on pretty much any legume and sucks the seeds as they're developing. It's got like little pointy shoulder pads.
Yeah.
Horrible thing. But this is the only legume, staple dry legume that I've got that will actually produce crops reliably, because it fruits just at the end of the autumn when it's getting too cool for those nasty insects to be active. But this year I should have been out there cutting the flowers off in the summer if I wanted to make sure all of the energy went into the big crop in the late autumn.
Hey,
They're
the joy of the seasons.
Yeah, and I've got some really great genetics from that. Amazing lady in Traviston, she's in her 80s, blind. She was born here and her parents were born here, from what I remember. And she gave me some of her lima beans that she has inherited from her families. And there's very, very little diversity in genetics in lima beans in Australia. There's basically the Madagascar bean that a lot of the permaculture people grow. That's it. Yeah. There's like so many other varieties overseas and they're hard to get into Australia, but I managed to luck out and find this amazing local resource that was on the verge of being lost.
That's fantastic. Heirloom seeds of a different sort.
Absolutely. So I have a process of rolling through this space. I don't try and cultivate it all at once. I'll basically clear out a section at a time, get it ready for the right time of the year, sow the seeds of my vegetables, get them established, and then basically move on. Yep. So this is an area that's been abandoned since last year. These are one of my favorite crops, the shallots. Yep. They're a population that I've created myself by mixing different commercial strains together and just picking what does the best. Yeah. And basically they're perennial now. So once I've got these established, I can just keep chopping off the top and letting them come back. Going. They reliably flower and produce vast amounts of really vigorous seed that's very easy to get going in the next generation. Yeah,
and surprisingly big flowers.
Yes, yeah, and the biggest ones of them are like about an inch thick. Like, why would I bother growing leeks when I've got this?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant.
And yeah, you might say it's like, oh, you should get in there and weed, they'll grow better. It's like, I already have more than I can eat. So why would I bother?
Why do you need? Yeah,
I could water them and they grow more, and I could, you reach a point where you're oversaturated by that particular ingredient and you're like, okay, that's it. I've figured out what less can I do and still get enough. Yeah. I'm a really big believer in the power of weeds and other biomass kind of plants. Yeah. You can add all the fertility that you like to a soil, but eventually get to the point where the problem isn't a deficiency, you've actually either got too much or an imbalance. And then you're screwed, basically. You've wrecked your soil and it's going to take a long time for it to get back to a state you can do anything with. Yeah. We've got this doing and adding kind of mentality to fix all of our problems, and often we go too far and then we're heading in the wrong direction.
That's the other way.
So I really love resting my ground and letting it fallow, letting whatever wants to grow. For example, this is, what do they call it? Chenopodium album. Goosefoot, Good King Henry, it's got a whole bunch of common names, like 5 million common names. It only grows where the mineral levels are really high. You'll never find it just growing out in our paddocks. Yeah. But the goats are really good at concentrating minerals, and when their manure comes in here, it reaches a level when these guys take off. Yeah. And they're a really old primitive crop. I am trialing, it's related to quinoa.
Yeah, all right, okay.
So I'm trialing relatives of this that are more adapted to our culture, our conditions than quinoa is.
Yeah, right.
So I'm starting to have some early success with that, finding a bird-resistant winter grain. Now, this is more weedy than I would normally like at this time of the year, but I'm feeling a bit lazy and it's not the end of the world. Yeah. Things I planted back in autumn, like these eggplants.
Yes.
They went in fairly late this year. Normally when I planted them on time, they'd be up to here by now. Yeah, and then the weeds wouldn't be bothering them as much. But you can see they're already flowering with the warm weather that we're getting early. Too. And they last for about 2 or 3 years once they're going in the ground. So they can tolerate a certain amount of weeds around them once they get past that critical tiny stage. Yep. So weeding isn't life or death for me. I've got crops and timing and techniques where, if I do weed, I'll get a little bit more of a crop a little bit sooner. If I don't, it's not the end of the world.
No. Well, you just change your complete attitude to weeds.
Yes.
What is a weed and why do we have it?
Well, I mentioned I've lost my favourite hoe recently. It's disappeared somewhere in the vegetation. They've claimed my weapon. But I'm actually thinking, it's like, do I really need it? Do I like hoeing? Like, it's my best hoe, but it's not my favourite. job. I'd rather be doing other things.
Yeah.
So I'm actually tempted when I get the time to come in here to use a little hand sickle, the Karmas. I don't know if you've seen them. Amazing tools. And just take the top off everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, produce all that biomass, leave the roots in the ground. If it comes back, cut it back again. And just tip the balance of the competition in favour of the crops and away from the weeds. But you don't have to completely eliminate things to be in control.
No.
This is another crop that I really, really love, the Ethiopian kale.
Right.
So it's a bit of an odd, I guess you call it a species, from the highlands of Ethiopia. This form of it's fairly common, and it's incredibly vigorous. You plant it in the autumn, you get these big juicy tasty leaves off it that taste like kailan, like they taste nicer than normal kales. And it keeps going for months and months and months before it finally flowers. Have a taste, yeah. I don't bother growing any of the Asian greens anymore because they get like that big and then they all flower at once the second you forget to water them. Whereas these guys, you get months and months and months of greens out of them. You can just pick them as you go. And then when they produce seed, you get so much seed that you can just throw it around everywhere. You can use it like a green manure. So this is the leaf broccoli as an alternative brassica.
Yeah.
So
I'll move over here so you can see it
no
on the
worries,
camera.
So normal kales, they grow fine here. A lot of them last multiple years, like the Tuscan kale people really like. But at least for me, being this close to the coast where we don't get really severe winter cold, they just don't flower. They just sit there until they finally die. This one, by contrast, is leaf broccoli. And if you want to taste a little bit of that.
There we go.
So
it's kind of interesting. It's a really interesting shape to it.
Yep. Quite nicely ruffled. So it comes from southern Italy, which is quite warm like us.
That's like the taste of broccoli, but the texture of cabbage.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So great flavour, flowers reliably, unlike all the other kales I've ever tried, so I can actually produce my own seed. And it was the winner in that category, but now I'm like, do I really like it? It's got some advantages. It's much more perennial than the Ethiopian kale. Like these last for years and years and years. Okay. And as soon as the weather turns good, you get a flush of nice leaves off them. But I don't know if they're quite productive enough or they produce quite enough seed. They're in the maybe basket at the moment. So I might need to do a bit of breeding work with them to see if I can bring out some more potential in them.
Yeah.
And these are daikon. Most of the daikon seed you buy only flowers down south, but this strain flowers reliably up here, and it's actually naturalizing. Like I find it growing out in the orchard now.
Brilliant.
So Fukuoka talked about that, the vegetables he was growing generation by generation, they just started spreading under the trees. And he didn't actually need to cultivate them anymore, he just had to go and pick them.
So Shane, I mean, it's obviously, your background in science is obviously going to be helping out with your, if you're going through selecting or working with different genetics and things like that. So how does your background actually fit in through this? Well,
only indirectly. So when people hear that I've got a background in research science, they're like, oh, this is something that I can't do. So I worked in a lab doing all sorts of chemistry and biochemistry. This is completely different. I've always loved growing plants. And it's actually a lot more accessible than people realize. Anyone who's got the time to pick up a paintbrush and move a little bit of pollen around, to plant different seeds of different varieties near each other and see which one does the best, and either pollinate them by hand or let the bees do the work, they can get involved with this. Look at it this way, every single crop that is domesticated around us, the work was originally done by illiterate peasant farmers 10,000, 5,000 years ago. They didn't have a PhD. They just looked at what they liked and grew it.
So if you're wanting to do some crossbreeding, like you said, you just grab a paintbrush, you go flower to flower, and you're essentially starting to crossbreed. It's as simple as that. And for the best species, you don't even need to do that. The bees will do it for you. Yeah, fantastic. No, this is great. So you sell seeds as well?
Yes, I do. So through my website, Zero Input Agriculture, there's a few different seed lists on there that I try and update every season. Well. Yep, brilliant. I also sell through the Cooran local shop and the Kandanga farm store. So look out for my package there.
Keep an eye out.
And I've got other varieties that aren't available retail like that I only sell through my website because they're a bit more specialised.
Yeah, so a bit more boutique. Great.
These are interesting. So this bed is the last gasp for a couple of different species. So these beetroots, beetroot does terrible here because of the low mineral in the soil. There's leeks just where you are as well, which are kind of redundant. So a breeder friend who's in New South Wales sent me a whole lot of seed from Grex's. So he took, you know, like 10 or 20 different varieties of beetroot, let them all cross under his conditions where they do really well, and sent me that really diverse mixed up seed, because I can't get beetroot to flower here reliably. So if any of these flower and produce viable seed, maybe I'm going to be a beetroot grower. If they don't, they're probably never going to get another chance again, and I'll, you know, spend my time on something else. So this is the flip side of breeding. This whole bed is all these different varieties that were sent to me. I'll probably get no useful food out of that this year, because I have to leave them and leave them and leave them in the hope that they might get around to flowering and making some seed. And if I eat one, that might have been the one that was able to produce the seed.
Some lettuce and things like that.
That's endive.
Oh, it's endive, is it?
Yeah, I don't grow lettuce anymore. I've pretty much given up on it.
Okay. So what's the difference between endive and lettuce? It certainly looks like
they're both daisies. But the similarity kind of ends there. So when these guys flower, they get these beautiful blue flowers, whereas lettuce have those little measly kind of yellowy flowers. Lettuce seeds fly all over the place on their fluffy little parachutes. These guys are just tiny little nubs that are kind of wedged in the bottom of the flower. And the only downside with these guys, they live forever, got really strong roots on them. I prefer the taste of them. They're like meaty and substantial, whereas lettuce is just nothing.
They right to just to grab a bit and...
You can try it. It'll probably be more bitter than you're used to, but if you take a nice tender leaf in the middle, that's probably the place to go. But yeah, I like the bitterness in them. I mix it with fennel, which is a bit sweet in my salads, and they even each other out nicely. So yeah, this is the Finaccio fennel. Anyone who's grown this better than me will be like clawing at their screen right now. I forgot to thin these at the right amount of time, but they're not really particular about that. I can come in and thin them at any time. They're such a long-lived plant. I think my oldest ones are probably 5 years old that I put them in, and I'm still going back and getting big heads off them. So yeah, they're utterly amazing plant. So you can eat the bulb, you can eat the root if you really want to. The leaves make really good salad greens if you pick the young ones and chop them across the stems. And the seeds are great in tea as well. So they're also herbal. So this is a bit of an idea about how I prepare a bed. So this has been hoed recently with a horrible substitute hoe that I've cursed every step of the way.
Not your favourite.
I've top dressed it with biochar, which is just from goat branches that were left over. And it's been top dressed with chicken manure from the chickens that are over at my folks next door. So I will go along the central row and dig the charcoal in. I normally don't do that, but I'm about to put a crop of sweet potatoes in here. And they just need a little bit of opening in the soil, and the charcoal helps keep it open so that their roots can expand. And another little volunteer crop here, which is interesting. This is grain amaranth. So this particular variety doesn't look so impressive. I've got another orange variety that grows like this tall and is amazing. This one actually outproduces it. It seems to have a non-shattering kind of trait. With the big orange one, you've got to get the timing just right. You'll see some of the seeds starting to drop on the ground and the other ones aren't quite mature yet. So you're constantly humming and hawing about when you actually should cut it and try and harvest it, whereas this one hangs onto its seeds.